All right, so continuing with social psychology review, which is 8 to 10% of the test, we're going to move into social and group influences. So the chameleon effect is the natural tendency to mimic others' behavior. This is usually due to suggestibility, high empathy, or mood linkage. Mood linkage just means that we tend to share each other's moods, so if we're around somebody who's consistently happy, we tend to mimic that mood. We had talked about suggestibility, like school shootings or suicides or things like that can also be a part of the chameleon effect. So conformity is adjusting our behavior or thinking to coincide with a social norm. Remember, social norms are different based on culture and things like that, and we have to be aware of what a social norm is in order to be able to conform to it. So Solomon Asch gives us the famous length of line study. Remember, participants were supposed to judge the length of lines, and it was found that subjects would conform when the rest of the group was wrong in their judgments about a third of the time. Conformity typically increased if any of these conditions. The group had a status or is admired. It consisted of at least 3 or more people. The group is unanimous. If the group is observing and is aware of your behavior, if you've made no prior commitments, if you feel incompetent or insecure, and if your culture encourages conformity. One of the biggest ways to decrease conformity is to have somebody else stand up and speak out. Along with conformity, people can either conform through normative social influence or informational. Normative is conforming to fit in. So you do something because you don't want to be targeted by like a social group, or you don't want to be made fun of or something like that. Informational social influence is where we conform because we assume that other people have information and that other people are correct in that information. And we oftentimes conform because we want to be right and we assume that other people are right. So that would be like me being very insecure in math class. If I worked through a whole problem, but somebody else had a different answer and I had to say it, I would probably go along with what that person said. Obedience is another area then, which brings us kind of our final major study in this area. Obedience is following the command of another person, and the famous experiments were really on what's called destructive obedience. So this is where Stanley Milgram and his shock experiment comes in. He did a lot of different variations of the study, but remember, it was found that 67% of the subjects, which we called teachers, would shock the learners. Remember, the learners were in on it, which means they're called Confederates. Until apparent death just because they were told to do so. Again, there were a lot of variations in the Milgram study. They did it at different locations. They did it with both women and men to try to see if that would influence obedience rates. So what are some of the components of destructive obedience? It includes gradual escalation, so starting small and building up. De-individuation, so oftentimes feeling anonymous as part of a group. Diffusion of responsibility, so feeling like it's not on you if something goes wrong. Proximity to the victim, so just like geographical closeness. And then presence of an authority figure. And remember, even a mere symbol of authority was enough, so like a badge or a lab coat or Yale versus a strip mall, things like that. All right, from there we move into a couple group influence terms. Social facilitation says that our performance on what we call well-learned tasks, our performance will improve when other people are around. So let's say you're a pretty good basketball player and you have a big game coming up. You want a big crowd because that big crowd can oftentimes help you reach that peak performance. Not cause and effect, just more correlational. Social loafing is the tendency for people in a group to exert less effort when they're working as part of a group. So think about that. You all know that. If you were individually responsible for writing a paper or turning in a project, you'd take a lot more ownership and put in more effort. But when you're part of a group, you tend to kind of slack off. De-individuation basically says that we feel anonymous as part of a group, and oftentimes we have less self-restraint, so we do things that we wouldn't otherwise do. So we talk about like mob mentality or things like that. But like the KKK, anything along those lines. But even something as simple as cheering at a basketball game, let's say that you're yelling at the refs, you're yelling really bad things at the refs. If I removed everyone from the crowd and it was just you, would you yell those same things? So that's an example of de-individuation. Group polarization basically says that the more that you talk about or think about with a group your stance on an issue, the stronger your opinion becomes and the further away from the other side you get. So think like Democrats talk to Democrats, Republicans talk to Republicans. The more that they talk, the stronger their opinions become and the further away from the other side they get. And then groupthink is a type of thinking that can occur when you're part of a group, and as part of that group, the goal is to like get along and get things done and all of that. And oftentimes that desire for harmony can kind of override logical or realistic thinking. So you might go along with something or make a group decision that later on you're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Or even in the moment you might be like, this is nuts, but I just want to get this done. So you go along with it anyway. So groupthink can be really powerful. We're going to stop there, and then I'll do a part 3 video that talks about social relations, and in there we'll do prejudice, aggression, and relationships.